Now, a tribute to Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman. The Goldwater Institute honored Mr. Friedman last May with its 1997 Goldwater Award. Congressman J.C. Watts of Oklahoma serves as Master of Ceremonies for this 50-minute event.
Thank you, Mike. We will expect the book report at next year's annual dinner, so you guys come prepared. There are fans and disciples of Milton Friedman in strange places, but none as unlikely as Hollywood. The man you're about to see on video wanted to be here tonight, but had a conflict. Something about promoting the new Batman movie. Instead, this man gave permission to use this spot he did to promote Dr. Friedman's Free to Choose series. I think you'll recognize him. Please roll the video.
Hi, I'm Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I would like a moment of your time because I wanted you to know something. I wanted you to know about Dr. Milton Friedman's TV series, Free to Choose. I truly believe that the series has changed my life. And when you have such a powerful experience as that, I think you shouldn't keep it to yourself. So I wanted to share it with you. Being free to choose for me means being free to make your own decisions. Free to live your own life, pursue your own goals, chase your own rainbow, without the government breathing down on your neck or standing on your shoes. For me, that meant coming here to America, because I came from a socialistic country where the government controls the economy. It's a place where you can hear 18-year-old kids already talking about their pension. But me, I wanted more. I wanted to be the best. Individualism like that is incompatible with socialism. So I felt I had to come to America. I had no money in my pocket, but here I had the freedom to get it. I've been able to parlay my big muscles into big business and a big movie career. And along the way, I was able to save and invest. And I watched America change. And I noticed this, that the more the government interfered and intervened and inserted itself into the free market, the worse the country did. But when the government stepped back and let the free enterprise system do its work, then the better we did, the more robust our economy grew, the better I did, and the better my business grew, and the more I was able to hire and help others. Okay, so there I was in Palm Springs, waiting for Maria to get ready so we could go out for a game of mixed doubles. I started zipping through the television dial, and I caught a glimpse of Nobel Prize winner economist Dr. Milton Friedman. I recognized him from the starting of my own degree in economics and business, but I didn't know I was watching Free to Choose. It knocked me out. Dr. Friedman expressed, validated, and explained everything I ever thought or experienced or observed about the way the economy works. And I guess I was really ready to hear it. He said, the economic race should not be arranged so that everyone ends at the finish line at the same time, but so that everyone starts at the starting line at the same time. Wow. I would like to write that one home to Austria. He said that society that puts equality before freedom winds up with neither, but that society puts freedom before equality will end up with a great measure of both. Boy, if I would have come up with that one myself, I maybe wouldn't have had to get into bodybuilding. When I did beef up my bodybuilding in business school, of course I started what Thomas Jefferson believed, and what Adam Smith thought, and even what Milton Friedman had to say. But with Free to Choose, it all came together. Their economic thought with my own personal experience. In a way, I felt I'd come home. I sought out Dr. Friedman and had the great pleasure and privilege of meeting him and his economist wife, Rose. And we've all become friends, and now I call him Milton. And that became a big pain in the neck about Free to Choose. All my friends and acquaintances got the tapes and the books for Christmas after Christmas, all the way through the Reagan years when I was able to tell them all, you see, Milton is right.
Thank you, Arnold. To those of us who believe in free markets, Milton Friedman is an icon. For nearly half a century now, Dr. Friedman has been preaching the gospel of capitalism and free markets to anyone who would listen. Many have listened. So many, in fact, that Dr. Friedman is widely regarded as the most influential economist of the 20th century. Earlier this week, syndicated columnist Stephen Chapman wrote, "When Dr. Friedman began his career, he was generally regarded, even in his profession, as badly deluded. Today it is widely acknowledged that the real delusions belong to his critics. It's a rare professor who greatly alters the thinking of his professional colleagues. It is even more rare when one who helps transform the world. Friedman has done both." To me, what sets Dr. Friedman apart from other economists, aside from the fact that he's usually right, is his undying optimism. Dr. Friedman is the kind of guy that go after Moby Dick in a rowboat and take the tartar sauce with it. And that's real optimism. While many economists make a name for themselves, issuing dire predictions and offering grave prophecies, Dr. Friedman exudes a buoyant faith that individuals, if unbridled by government regulation, will act in a manner that will lead to a greater prosperity for everyone. To me, this eternal optimism is best illustrated by Dr. Friedman's feelings about the late British economist John Maynard Keynes, whose economic theories were used to justify the type of government intervention in the 1930s that has expanded ever since, the same type of government intervention that Milton Friedman finds so horrible. John Maynard Keynes died in 1946. One would think that Dr. Friedman would say, "Good riddance." No, Milton Friedman remains convinced that Keynes died too early, and that he had lived for another decade, he would have had time to inform the advocates of big government that they had taken Keynesianism too far. That, my friends, is eternal optimism. Being an optimist, however, has never stopped Dr. Friedman from telling it like it is. This is a trait that he shares with the Institute's namesake. About the same time Senator Goldwater was traveling to Tennessee to announce that the popular Tennessee Valley Authority should be privatized, Dr. Friedman was challenging President Kennedy's popular statement, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Neither half of the statement, Dr. Friedman noted, expresses a relationship between the citizen and his government that is worthy of the free men in a free society. A free man, Dr. Friedman said, will ask neither what his country can do for him nor what he can do for his country. He will ask rather, what can I and my compatriots do through government to help us discharge our individual responsibilities to achieve our several goals and purposes, and above all, to protect our freedom. One of Milton Friedman's greatest contributions has come in the area of education. Many in the public education establishment will tell you that the current push for market-based education reform is a recent phenomenon dreamed up by Reagan and Bush administration appointees who would want to destroy public education. Not true. Milton Friedman has been talking about vouchers and school choice for 35 years. Perhaps no state has taken Dr. Friedman's pronouncements about the destructive nature of public education monopolies to heart more than Arizona. Arizona has the most effective charter school law in the country. So effective, in fact, that more than 10% of Arizona's public schools are now owned and operated by the private sector. Arizona also passed the most far-reaching tuition tax credit law in the nation. The philosophical base upon which these reforms were built was established by Milton Friedman. In his work, Capitalism and Freedom, Dr. Friedman articulates the paradox of government. Government, he said, is necessary to preserve our freedom. Yet the concentration of power in political hands is the greatest threat to our freedom. In order to benefit from the promise of government while avoiding the threat to freedom, we must limit government scope and disperse its power. I could not agree more, and this is what we've tried to accomplish in the United States Congress over the last couple of years. Dr. Friedman does not believe, and neither do I, that you can solve America's problems by Washington taking money from taxpayers and throwing it at problems. For instance, we have spent over the last 30 years more than $5 trillion on a welfare system that penalizes mothers for saving their money, penalizes mothers for marrying the father of the children, and what we have gotten is a deeper poverty today than we had 30 years ago when the spending spree started. We have also gotten and found that in 1997 America, the average American family will pay more in taxes than they pay in food, clothing, and shelter combined. Dr. Friedman would say to us all, we must not measure compassion by how many people are on food stamps and AFDC and in public housing. Yet we should measure compassion by how few people are on food stamps, AFDC, and in public housing. And through the individual effort, we can encourage them to be a resource rather than a drain on resources, and use their individual talents, their God-given talents, God-given abilities, to go for the goal and be the best that they can be. One of our greatest assets in America is individual effort and individual responsibility. My father, Buddy Watts, who spent 2 days in the 7th grade, he has a 6th grade education, taught me at a very early age. And friends, I could not have told you when I was a junior in college what a conservative or a liberal was. I had no clue. But I could have told you that if you were raised under the roof of Buddy and Helen Watts, that you were going to work, no questions asked. You were going to believe in the individual effort. You were going to believe in sacrifice and commitment. You were going to respect adults. You were going to go to school and get an education. Not only were you going to go to school, you were going to act civilized when you got there. You were going to respect adults, even the town drunk. My father had a 6th grade education, and he knew very well what Frederick Douglass meant when he said, some people know the importance of education because they have it. I know the importance of education because I don't have it. Buddy Watts understood that. My mother and father also taught me that, Junior, you are responsible for your own decisions. If you buy your bed, you sleep in it. You are responsible for the decisions that you make. Your friend is not. Your sister is not. Your brothers are not. You, J.C. Watts Jr., are responsible for the decisions that you make. Good or bad, you buy your bed, you sleep in it. Again, one of our greatest assets in America. And one of the most wonderful things that we can do, as Dr. Friedman believes so strongly, that we should encourage, not discourage, individual responsibility. We have done an excellent job in creating poverty over the last 30, 35 years in America. We've done a wonderful job. We have done all the wrong things to create productive human behavior and wealth. There was a revolution started in 1955 on Cleveland Avenue in downtown Montgomery, Alabama, by a lady by the name of Rosa Parks that refused to give up her seat at the front of the bus. And friends, I believe we need to start another revolution in 1997 America. A revolution against poverty, using the tools, as Dr. Friedman so eloquently expresses, the tools of free enterprise, private home ownership, individual responsibility. Instead, we have done all the wrong things, again, to create productive human behavior and wealth. And it helps to know what went wrong and why. And it's interesting, 35 years ago, Dr. Friedman was laughed at. But as Arnold Schwarzenegger said in a 3-minute video, today we know that he was right. All the wrong things. Dr. Friedman understands that you will create poverty if you allow the reward for welfare and unemployment to be greater than the reward for working and being productive. He understands that very well. Dr. Friedman understands that you will create poverty. You will create poverty if you reward families that break up more than you reward families that stay together. He understands that very well. Dr. Friedman understands that you will create poverty if you allow the reward for illicit capitalism on the streets, for the drug dealer on the streets, allow the reward for the drug dealer to be greater than the reward for the risk taker, the person that will go and take a second mortgage in the home, take their $7,000, say, I've got a product or service, I'm going to take it to the marketplace, and I'm going to build me a business. If you allow the reward for the drug dealer to be greater than the reward for the risk taker, you will create poverty. Dr. Friedman understood that. And last but not least, if you really want to expand poverty, and Dr. Friedman has preached it, he understands it very well. If you really want to expand poverty, you weaken the link between effort and reward. You will create a poverty so deep that in less than 12 years' time, we will be and look like a third world nation. Before we invite David Friedman to the platform, we thought you might want to hear Dr. Friedman in his own words. Please roll the video.
I feel so strongly that America is at a critical point in its history. For the past 50 years, we have been moving away from the fundamental principles that made this a great country, the fundamental principles of freedom, economic, political, of relying on the individual, of keeping government in its place, of keeping government to be as an umpire. About 50 years ago, shortly after the Great Depression started, all that changed. Government came to play a larger and larger role in our lives. We shifted from an emphasis on individual responsibility to an emphasis on social responsibility. The fundamental forces that made this country great, the productivity, the ingenuity, the energy, are still with us, and they have been with us over that 50 years. We have continued to grow. We have continued to develop, to become a greater and a better nation. But at the same time, along with some of the good things that government has been doing, we have been becoming an over-governed and over-regulated society. We have been moving down the road that Friedrich Hayek in his great book called the road to serfdom. We do not have to continue down that road. We can be the masters of our own destiny. In order to stop going down that road, we have to go back to some of the basic principles that underlie our nation. We somehow or other have to find a way to prevent government from continuing to grow and continuing to take over more and more control over our lives. 10 years ago, there seemed very little hope of stopping that trend. It seemed to be moving like a juggernaut. It seemed to be moving in a way that it was impossible to reverse. But things have been changing. More and more people have been becoming disillusioned about the possibility of solving our problem simply by throwing more tax money at them. More and more people have come to recognize the fallacy of trying to solve problems by spending somebody else's money. They have been coming to recognize that in the process of doing that, on the one hand, you always waste money, because nobody spends somebody else's money as carefully as he spends his own. But also, in order to spend somebody else's money, you first have to take it away from them. That means that force is at the very bottom of the modern paternal state. These views have been becoming more and more widely accepted. There is a change in intellectual climate. As a result, for the first time in many years, I believe we have a real hope of changing the course of events, of getting our country back on the track toward greater human and individual freedom.
Thank you, Dr. Friedman. It gives me great pleasure to introduce David Friedman, who will accept the 1997 Goldwater Award on behalf of his father, Dr. Milton Friedman. David? As we said earlier, Dr. Milton Friedman could not be with us this evening due to health problems. So David, as you just saw, is accepting this award on behalf of his father. And at this time, again, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the son of Dr. Milton Friedman, David.
I'm delighted to be here as a guest of the Goldwater Institute. In 1964, a few years ago, I was both an enthusiastic supporter of Senator Goldwater's presidential campaign and an undergraduate at Harvard University. I remember that year the Harvard Crimson had a poll which found that about 20% of the students at Harvard supported Goldwater, and I was astonished. I would have said that there were about 20 students at Harvard who supported Goldwater, and I knew all of them. One of my interesting experiences that year was getting into a long and friendly conversation with a stranger at a lunch counter kind of place, in which I said that I was a supporter of Goldwater, and he said, well, how could you possibly believe such and such? And I then gave him an explanation of how I could possibly believe such and such, to which he had no good answer. And he said, well, how could you possibly believe? And this went on for a long time, and he was a very nice, courteous fellow. It was a pleasant conversation, and I answered each of his points. And at the end of it, he said in a very sort of tentative way, because he obviously didn't want to be rude or anything, are you by any chance holding all of these positions as a joke? And it was clear to me that that was the intellectual equivalent of what's a nice girl like you doing in a place like this. How could I possibly be sufficiently rational and intelligent to make such good defenses for what he knew were incorrect positions and still be so stupid as to believe in them? One of our family jokes when I was at Harvard was that I couldn't afford to take any economics courses. I'd fail them because I'd give the right answers. Now, when I agreed to speak here tonight, I wasn't quite sure what to talk about. I think my father planned to talk about vouchers, a subject very dear to his heart. My impression, however, is that on the whole, the Goldwater Institute is already in favor of vouchers, and I have strong objections to preaching to the converted. It seems to me a waste of time on both sides. I could, I suppose, tell you why I think a fully private system of education would be even better than a voucher system. But if you're interested in those arguments, you can either read the article on my webpage or wait for the next issue of Liberty Magazine. So I thought instead I would talk to you about one of the short list of things about which I know more than my father. That being the experience of being brought up by a libertarian economist. Economists, in trying to understand the world, assume that individuals act in their rational self-interest. And one result is that people who don't like economics tend to caricature economists as selfish, cold-blooded, although admittedly rational people. Well, 1 out of 3 isn't bad. In my experience, economists are not particularly selfish and cold-blooded. As far as I can remember, my parents were at least as indulgent to me as my friends' parents were to them. But there was, I think, a very important difference, which is related to the rational part. As I see it, there are only 2 fundamental views of small children. One of them is that they are pets who can talk, and one of them is that they are human beings who are small and don't know very much. My parents held to the second view. At the most fundamental level, our family was a society of equals, however old we were. That does not mean that the children got to vote on the family budget. We didn't earn the family budget. But it did mean that parents had precisely the same obligation as children to justify their beliefs. That the answer, because I say so, was a confession of intellectual failure. And it was not an answer we got. That the fundamental rule was there are good reasons for things, there are bad reasons for things, and if you don't have good reasons, the fact that you're bigger than me doesn't change that. All right? A few years ago, I came across a book by Paul Krugman called Peddling Prosperity. It's a rather interesting book. He started out writing a book defending the views of left-wing economists against the views of right-wing economists, and he ended up writing a book defending economists left and right against the abuse of their work by politicians. It's quite interesting. But in the course of that book, he said a number of things about my father, some of which weren't true. And one of them was the statement that Milton Friedman is a wonderful debater, but he does sometimes cut corners and cheat in his arguments. And I wrote him a long letter discussing what I thought was right and wrong about his book, in the course of which I told him that that particular statement was wrong, and I said it was wrong speaking as the world's leading expert on arguing with Milton Friedman. 50 years and counting. I am told about second or third hand by a friend that someone met me and my father when I suppose I was about 12 or 13, skiing in Colorado, that we spent all our time arguing and I won half the arguments. Now, I think the last part of that is flattery. I don't believe my lifetime average is nearly that high, but the rest of it was about right. I don't know quite what it was like when I was really small, but I am attempting to replicate the experiment in order to find out. Today is my younger son's 4th birthday, and I don't think he's agreed with me about anything yet. Let me go on to say a little bit about freedom as an education. One of the really fundamental intellectual skills that human beings need is the ability to evaluate information on internal evidence. You read a book, you talk to somebody. You very rarely have the time and the ability to check all the things in that book or to check what the person says. And a lot of what you have to do consists of telling by how the book is written. Is this a careful, honest, honorable person who really, when he doesn't know, tells you? Or is this the kind of con artist who writes lots of books? our present educational system is, as far as I can tell, almost perfectly designed to suppress that ability. The normal experience of a child in elementary school, to a slightly lesser degree in high school, is that he has two sources of information, both authoritative. One of them is the textbook, one of them is the teacher, and it is not his job to question either. And it seems to me that when you teach people that way, you should expect people who believe that the way you find out what is true is to go to an authority and ask them. And that is not conducive to the survival of a free society. I much prefer the approach that I was brought up with, where there are no authorities, there are only good arguments and bad arguments. And I think it works. Let me tell you another story, which I'm fairly fond of. When we spent our summers up in New Hampshire, and my job was to mow the lawn. And when I was about, 12 or 13 or 14, I started feeling abused. It seemed to me that it was just unfair that I should have to mow the lawn. Having been trained by my parents, instead of simply saying, well, I'm abused, I said, well, let me think through this situation. My mother spends quite a lot of time taking care of the house, taking care of us, cooking us dinner. My father spends quite a lot of time working at his job and earning money to support us. Every week or two, I've got to spend an hour or two mowing the lawn. This is clearly an unfair situation, but I'm the exploiter, not the exploited. And so I went to my father and I said, I understand that that boys of about my age tend to feel resentful of authority, and I've discovered that I'm feeling resentful of you. But I just want you to realize that I've thought it through and I realize that I don't have any just basis for that resent, so don't take it seriously. And that, it seems to me, is the kind of consequence that you get when you teach children that what you are supposed to be doing is thinking and finding good reasons for things, as opposed to finding out what the teacher says and remembering it. Let me tell you another story. This is a story that our family's been telling for a long time, but I think I can perhaps extend it a little bit. My mother's parents lived in Portland, Oregon, and on very rare occasions we would visit them. And it was, as I remember, a 3-day, 2-night railroad trip at the time to get from Chicago to Portland. And my parents had a choice. They could buy Pullman accommodations for me and my sister, which cost a good deal of money, or we could sit up. And my father, true to his principles, put the question to us. It would cost a certain number of dollars to buy us Pullman accommodations. Would we rather have beds for those 2 nights, or would we rather have that sum of money added to our allowance? And we, of course, chose to sit up. Now, since that time, I've thought about that story more, and I've acquired a greater perspective on that story from both a theoretical and empirical standpoint, because I have been a parent. And I have discovered that when children don't get enough sleep, they get cranky. And that having cranky children imposes what economists refer to as negative externalities on the people around them. And you might think that it would follow from that line of analysis that my father was really wrong, and that it wasn't appropriate to leave the decision to us because the decision had costs and benefits for them as well. But I don't think so. Because I think this particular decision also had a positive externality. That is to say, it was a lesson. It taught us something about the consequences of being free to make your own decision, getting the benefits, but also bearing the cost. And I think that on net, the net externalities were positive. I can say that because I got the gains, and my parents had to pay the loss of putting up with us when we had less sleep than we should have. And therefore, it was a correct decision. Now, an economist will tell you that talk is cheap, that the way in which we judge what people really believe is not by what they say, but by what they do. And after all, given the nature of this dinner, it's very easy for me to stand up here and say nice things about my parents, sort of what's expected. The real question is not what do I say, but how do I act? And the answer is that to the best of my ability, I attempt to bring up my children by what I see as the principles by which I was brought up. And that is the economist's evidence that I, in fact, believe what I'm saying. And let me tell you one or two stories about the result of that experiment. I have an older son who's 20 now, and I and his mother were separated when he was an infant, and he was brought up mostly by his mother and stepfather, although I also saw quite a lot of him. And I have two stories about him. One of them is that when he visited with me and my present wife, and when he said, such and such is true, and we said, well, why do you believe that's true? And he said, that's my opinion. And we would say, well, why do you hold that opinion? And he would say, well, no, it's just my opinion. And one of us would say, well, if you hold opinions with no reason, why do you expect anybody else to have any interest in them? And eventually he got a little bit unhappy with being mistreated in this fashion. And he said to either me or my wife, I don't remember which, when I tell my other parents that something's my opinion, they say, all right, that's your opinion. Well, I think it was my wife replied, when your other parents tell you to do something, are they obliged to give you good reasons? He said, no. Well, she said, when we tell you to do something and you ask us why, do we feel obliged to give you good reasons? Yes. Well, which do you prefer? A world where the grown-ups are free to give you orders and say, do it because I say to do it, and have no obligation to defend what they say, and in which you similarly can express any opinion you like and have no intellectual obligation to be able to back it up? Or do you prefer a world where both you and your parents are playing by the same rules, which are the rules that if one is going to say something or do something, one ought to have good reasons for it? And he concluded that he preferred our rules. Second story goes back to the question of how one learns, and my basic belief that reality is a great teacher. I think it is desirable that children should get to play the role of adults in safe environments as early as practical. We have a friend who for many, many years has had a several-day-long New Year's party at her house in Boston every year. It started out when a friend of hers was killed in an auto accident on New Year's Eve, and she decided to have a party where nobody had to go home. So friends come, and they eat, and they talk, and they play board games, and they talk with each other. It's generally a very pleasant social activity, and at least when we were all younger, lots of people slept on the floor or on the couch and such, and the next morning somebody made breakfast, and that evening someone made spaghetti dinner, the same spaghetti dinner, and it was sort of a couple of days of a bunch of friends getting together in a relaxed environment. That was a very safe environment. And so when my son was, I suppose, 11 or 12, and went to that New Year party with us, we told him, while you're at this party, there are no rules imposed on you. You're in charge of yourself. Go to sleep when you want, get up when you want, do what you want. You're a person too. And about day 3, he came up to, I forget whether it was me or Betty, and said, I've made an interesting discovery. Oh, what's the interesting discovery? If I stay up all night for 2 nights running, I get a headache. Again, I think that's a good way of educating people. It's pretty harmless. I mean, a headache is a low price to pay for learning that lesson. And the more important lesson is that you take actions, you bear the consequences. And that's a lesson that I think children and grown-ups all ought to learn. Thank you.
I don't know if y'all remember the old Art Linkletter program, and he would have the part of his show, he would have this segment talking about children do the darndest things. And I travel a lot, and here about 3 years ago, I was on a plane flying from Oklahoma City I was going to Las Vegas to do a convention out there, and I was flying from Oklahoma City to Denver, then Denver and then Las Vegas. And on this flight, it was not very crowded from Oklahoma City to Denver, and I was in row 18, and there was a young man in row 17. And this young man's name was Lance, and Lance and I kind of became buddies, and we were playing peekaboo with each other, and Lance threw his cup back there at me, and I threw it back up there at him, and we just had a wonderful time, and after about 10 minutes of that, Lance ended up back in my row, in row 18, in my lap. And I recalled when I was a kid growing up, David, my dad would put me on his knee and rock his knee as though it was a bucking horse. And so I recall that, and so I did that with Lance. I was rocking Lance on my knee, and after about 15 minutes of that, Lance had this amazing discovery, I guess. Lance discovered that the color of his skin was white and the color of my skin was black. So I guess Lance felt compelled to sing a song, so he did. He said, Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red, yellow, black, and white, they're precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. I said, Lance, buddy, thank you for singing that song. I said, Lance, that's one of my favorite songs. Would you sing it again? So he did. He said, Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red, yellow, black, and white, they're precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. I said, Lance, buddy, thank you so much for singing that song. And I reached in my pocket, and Lance was sitting there on my knee, and I gave Lance $1. And Lance looked at that dollar, and he looked at me. He looked at the dollar, and he looked at me. And he said, I think I'll sing it again. Dr. Friedman would have been very proud of him. Jeff, at this time in our program, I see that we might get a phone call from Dr. Friedman. Were we able to arrange that? We are. Okay. So at this time, we will, Dr. Friedman is with us by phone, and Jeff is over there getting ready to set that up. So if you'll bear with us for just a hot second, we'll make that work.
Okay. Hello? Do you hear me there? No.
We can hear you, Dr. Friedman.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Shall I go ahead?
Have at it.
I regret very much that I cannot be with you this evening. I had been looking forward to a trip to Arizona and to Phoenix, where I have good friends and where I've always had a good time, and where many good ideas brew. The Goldwater Foundation, in particular, is the fount of many good ideas. As I believe my son mentioned, it especially is very advanced in the field of promoting parental choice in education. And I have a great admiration and fondness for Barry Goldwater, going back to the 1964 presidential election. That was a great occasion, despite the electoral outcome. I am honored, therefore, to receive the Goldwater Award this year, and I am very grateful to my son for being willing to go out and to accept it on my behalf. But I think he's already talked enough for the Friedman family, and so let me only say thank you and have a very good evening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Friedman, for being with us, and that was a special treat for us all, I know.
You're welcome.
Oh, you're still there?
I'm still here.
You're listening in on our conversation, huh?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Eavesdropping is a fine thing to do.
Well,
but I'm gonna hang you up now.
well, Dr. Friedman, let me say you have been an encouragement and a delight to us all over the years with your writings and with your work, and we thank you for what you do for our great nation, and you are a great American, and we all salute you this evening, and thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Well, my friends, this concludes our evening, and it has been a wonderful evening. And again, David Friedman, thank you very much for being with us, and we're delighted that you were able to come instead of in the place of your father. And with that, I say to you all, thank you very much for coming this evening. We will see you at the Goldwater Institute's 10th anniversary dinner this time next year. Thank you very much, and good evening.